Hey, my name's Daniel Evans. I'm 29, and I've been living alone in a quiet suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of Denver for the past 4 years. I'm a freelance interior design engineer, specializing in custom home layouts for mid-sized firms. My days are pretty routine, sketching blueprints at my home office during the week, maybe grabbing a coffee at the local diner, and spending weekends tending to my small yard or tinkering with DIY projects. It's a simple life, one that suits me. No drama, no rush. I like the predictability of it all. The neighborhood is the kind of place where everyone knows each other's names but keeps a respectful distance. Tree-lined streets, well-kept lawns, and the occasional block party in the summer. If there's anyone here I'd call more than just a casual acquaintance, it's Olivia Turner, the woman who lives in the house right next door. She's 32 with a petite frame, golden blonde hair she often ties up in a loose ponytail, and these deep blue eyes that seem to hold stories you could get lost in. We've been neighbors since I moved in, and over time we've built this easy, unspoken friendship through little things. It started innocently enough. One rainy afternoon shortly after I settled in, she knocked on my door asking if I could help fix a leaking faucet in her kitchen. I'm handy with tools from my design work, so I grabbed my kit and headed over. While I worked, she chatted about the house, how she and her husband Michael had bought it 5 years ago and slowly turned it into their home. She made me a cup of tea, and we ended up talking for an hour about everything from local hiking trails to her love for baking. A few weeks later, I returned the favor by helping her reinforce a creaky window frame that kept rattling in the wind. In return, she'd show up at my door with fresh baked chocolate chip cookies or pumpkin muffins, saying she'd made too many and didn't want them to go to waste. I remember one crisp winter morning, snow blanketing the sidewalks like a fresh coat of paint. She knocked, wearing oversized wool mittens, and handed me a warm container of cinnamon rolls straight from the oven. "If you don't take these, I'll eat them all myself," she said with a laugh that lit up her whole face. Another time, I was over fixing a faulty electrical outlet in her kitchen, and we joked about how I was the only guy in the neighborhood who didn't mind getting his hands dirty. Those moments felt natural, effortless. Michael, her husband, was always polite when our paths crossed. A steady, reserved man in his mid-30s who traveled often for his sales job. He'd wave from his car or chat briefly about the Broncos game, but I could tell he adored her in his quiet way. Their marriage seemed solid, even if it wasn't the most affectionate one I'd seen. Then everything changed in an instant. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of ordinary day that blends into the next. I was in my office wrapping up a client call when I heard the sirens. By evening, the news rippled through the neighborhood like a chill wind. Michael had suffered a massive heart attack while Olivia was preparing dinner. He collapsed right there in the living room, and despite her frantic CPR and the paramedics' efforts, he was gone before they reached the hospital. Just like that, a man in his prime, healthy one moment, vanished the next. The funeral was the following day, simple and subdued, held at a small chapel on the edge of town. I attended standing in the back among a handful of neighbors and distant relatives. Olivia wore a plain black dress, her hair pulled back tightly, her face pale and expressionless. She stood by the casket, shaking hands and nodding at condolences, but there were no tears, just this distant, hollow look in her eyes, like she'd been drained of everything. Michael's family was sparse. His parents had passed years ago, and he had no siblings. Olivia seemed so small in that room, surrounded by whispers and sympathy that felt more obligatory than genuine. After the service, everyone dispersed quickly, leaving her to return to an empty house. That night, I couldn't shake the image of her standing alone. From my living room window, I could see the faint glow of lights in her home, blurred by the evening fog rolling in from the mountains. The neighborhood was silent, but my mind wasn't. In places like this, people respect privacy, too much sometimes. We wave, we chat about the weather, but we don't intrude on grief. Still, I couldn't ignore the pull. Olivia had been kind to me in ways that went beyond neighborly gestures. Those baked goods weren't just food, they were her way of connecting, of filling the quiet spaces in her life. Had anyone checked if she'd eaten? If she was truly okay? I headed to my kitchen and threw together a pot of chicken soup. Simple, hearty, with carrots, celery, and a dash of thyme. It was the kind of comfort food my mom used to make when I was sick. I ladled it into a bowl, covered it with foil, added some buttered bread on the side, and walked over. The porch light flickered as I rang the bell, my heart pounding a little harder than it should have. Olivia opened the door slowly, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen, her face gaunt from lack of sleep. She looked at me for a long moment, as if processing who I was. Then her gaze dropped to the bowl in my hands. "I figured you might not have eaten," I said softly. "It's still hot?" She stared at the soup, her lips trembling, then nodded faintly and stepped aside to let me in. "Thank you, Daniel. I don't even remember the last time I did." I followed her to the kitchen, where the counters were spotless, but the air felt stale, like the house itself was holding its breath. She set the bowl down and motioned for me to sit. I did, watching as she took a tentative spoonful, the steam rising like a veil between us. The clock on the wall ticked softly, the only sound breaking the silence. After a few bites, she set the spoon down, her eyes welling up. "I don't know what to do next, Daniel. The house was already quiet, but now it's just empty. Everything feels like it happened yesterday, but it's gone." I didn't interrupt. I just listened as she poured out her pain. The shock of finding him, the blur of the hospital, the numbness that followed. She talked about how Michael's absences for work had made the house feel lonely even before, but at least there was someone to come home to. "Sometimes I wake up and think it's all a dream," she whispered, "like I'm living someone else's life." The words hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. I reached out instinctively, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone in this, Olivia, not tonight." We sat there in the dim glow of the kitchen light for what felt like hours after that. The soup bowl was empty now, pushed to the side, and the steam had long since dissipated, leaving the air cooler and heavier. Olivia leaned back in her chair, her fingers tracing idle patterns on the wooden tabletop, worn smooth from years of meals and conversations. She didn't speak right away, and I didn't push. Grief has its own rhythm, and I'd learned that the hard way years ago. Instead, I just stayed, letting the silence stretch between us like a shared blanket. Eventually, she broke it with a soft sigh. "You know, I grew up in a small town in Ohio," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Nothing like Denver. Flat fields as far as you could see and winters that bit right through you. My parents ran a little bakery. Fresh bread every morning, pies on Sundays. I used to help my mom roll out dough after school. That's where I learned to bake, I think. It was her way of making the house feel alive, even on the coldest days." She paused, her eyes distant, as if she were seeing those old kitchen counters instead of the one in front of her. "Michael loved my pies. We'd make them together sometimes, especially around the holidays. He'd pretend to help, but mostly just steal bites of the filling. It was our thing, one of those little rituals that made everything feel normal." I nodded, picturing it. Michael had always struck me as the steady type, not overly expressive, but reliable. From the few times I'd seen them together, waving from their porch or unloading groceries, he seemed content in that quiet partnership. "He sounded like a good man," I said gently. "He was," she replied, her voice cracking just a little. "But things changed over time. His job kept him away more and more, weeks on the road, late nights when he was home. The house started feeling empty long before this. We'd eat dinner separately sometimes, even when he was here. Sleep in the same bed, but feel miles apart. I told myself it was just life, you know? But now, looking back, I wonder if we lost each other somewhere along the way." She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, not quite crying but close. "And now it's all gone. The plans we had, the little arguments that didn't matter, the mornings where he'd make coffee just the way I liked it. Poof! Like it never happened." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I'd had my own brush with loss a few years back. My grandfather, the man who'd raised me after my parents divorced and drifted apart. He'd been my anchor, teaching me how to fix things around the house, how to listen more than talk. When he passed from complications after a stroke, it felt like the ground had shifted under me. I told her about it then, keeping my voice steady. "I know that emptiness," I said. "After my grandfather died, I couldn't stand being in his old workshop. Every tool reminded me of him. I thought I'd never feel whole again. But time, it doesn't erase the pain, it just makes space around it. Grief is part of loving someone that much. If it didn't hurt, it wouldn't have meant anything. She looked at me then, really looked, her blue eyes searching mine as if finding something familiar. You're right. It hurts because it mattered. But right now it feels like too much to carry alone. We fell quiet again, the clock ticking onward into the late hours. The neighborhood outside was asleep, the only sounds the occasional creak of the house settling and the faint hum of the refrigerator. I glanced at my watch, nearly midnight, and realized I'd overstayed what might be polite. I should head home, I said, standing up slowly. You need rest. If you need anything, just text or call. I'm right next door. Olivia stood too, but she didn't move toward the door. Instead, she wrapped her arms around herself, her expression shifting to something vulnerable, almost childlike. She hesitated, biting her lip, and for a moment, I thought she might just nod and let me go. But then, in a voice so small it was barely audible, she said, Daniel, could you stay here tonight? I froze, my heart skipping a beat. The words hung there unexpected and my mind raced. I knew it wasn't what it might sound like, no, not from her, not now. But still, it caught me off guard. Before I could respond, she shook her head quickly, her cheeks flushing. I mean, just on the couch. I know it sounds strange, maybe even inappropriate, but I can't face being alone right now. The house feels too big, too quiet. I just need to know someone's here, even if it's only for tonight, please. There was no mistaking the plea in her eyes, the raw fear of the silence closing in. I thought about the empty rooms upstairs, the bed that must feel vast without Michael, the shadows that grief casts in the dark. In that moment, I understood. It wasn't about anything more. It was about not letting the loneliness swallow her whole. Of course, I said softly, easing back into the chair. If that's what you need, I'm here. Relief washed over her face, and she managed a faint smile. Thank you, I have blankets and pillows in the linen closet. Let me get them. She disappeared down the hall for a moment, returning with a soft fleece blanket, a spare pillow, and even a toothbrush from the guest bathroom. Still in its packaging, but she mentioned it was one of Michael's extras he always kept on hand. Use whatever you need, she said, handing them over. The couch pulls out if you want more space. I set up the makeshift bed in the living room, the fabric cool against my skin as I unfolded it. Olivia lingered in the doorway, watching with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. Before turning toward her bedroom, she paused, the hallway light casting a soft halo around her. Good night, Daniel. Knowing you're here, it makes the dark feel less overwhelming. Good night, Olivia, I replied, settling in. As the lights dimmed and the house grew still, I lay there listening to her footsteps fade upstairs, the soft click of her door closing. The faint sounds of her moving around, drawers opening, water running, filtered down, a reminder that she wasn't alone. But as I stared at the ceiling, shadows dancing from the street lamp outside, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd crossed into something deeper. This wasn't just neighborly help anymore. It was stepping into her world, her pain, and wondering if I was ready for what might come next. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the living room as I stirred on the couch. My neck was stiff from the unfamiliar pillow, and for a moment I forgot where I was. Then it all came back. The quiet conversation, Olivia's plea, the way the house had felt less empty with me in it. I sat up, folding the blanket neatly and stacking the pillow on top. The clock on the wall showed just past 7. Upstairs I could hear faint movement. Olivia was already awake, perhaps making coffee or simply pacing through the routines of a day she wasn't ready for. Before I could gather my things to slip out quietly, the doorbell rang, sharp and insistent, echoing through the house like an unwelcome intrusion. I froze, glancing toward the stairs. Footsteps hurried down, and Olivia appeared, her hair tousled from sleep, still in the same clothes from last night. She gave me a quick, apologetic look as she passed. I'll get it, she murmured, her voice hoarse. I busied myself straightening the couch cushions, trying to make the space look untouched. From the foyer I heard the door open, followed by a familiar voice, warm but edged with concern. Olivia, honey, I brought breakfast. Bagels from that place you like and some fresh fruit. How are you holding up? It was her mother-in-law, Margaret, Michael's mom. I'd met her once or twice at neighborhood gatherings, a poised woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair and a no-nonsense demeanor that commanded respect. Olivia's response was muffled, but I caught the hesitation in her tone. Mom, come in. I wasn't expecting you so early. There was a rustle of bags, footsteps entering the hall, and then silence as Margaret stepped into view of the living room. Her eyes landed on me immediately, narrowing slightly in surprise. I stood there feeling exposed in my rumpled shirt from yesterday, the blanket still half folded in my arms. Daniel, she said, her voice polite but laced with something sharper. You're here early, or... She trailed off, glancing between me and Olivia, her brows knitting together. Olivia flushed, stepping forward quickly. He stayed on the couch last night, Mom. I couldn't sleep and the house felt too quiet. He was just being a good neighbor. Her words tumbled out, defensive yet earnest, and I could see the strain in her posture, the way she wrapped her arms around herself like a shield. Margaret set the bags down on the entry table, her expression shifting from surprise to a measured concern. I see, she said slowly, her gaze lingering on me a beat too long. It wasn't accusatory exactly, but appraising, as if she were piecing together a puzzle she hadn't expected. Well, that's kind of you, Daniel. Grief can make nights unbearable. She turned to Olivia, softening a little. But you know you can always call me, dear. I'm just a drive away. I nodded awkwardly, mumbling a "Good morning, Mrs. Turner," before excusing myself to the kitchen. I'll make some coffee, I offered, needing an escape from the tension. As I measured grounds into the filter and started the machine, their voices carried faintly from the hall. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the house was too quiet to avoid it. Just be careful, Olivia, Margaret was saying, her tone low and advisory. It's only been a day since the funeral. People talk in neighborhoods like this. You have to think about the family's reputation, Michael's memory. I know you're hurting, but inviting a man to stay over? It could be misunderstood. There was a pause, and I imagined Olivia's face, the way her eyes might drop to the floor. I'm not judging, sweetheart. I just want to protect you. You've been through enough. Olivia's reply was softer, almost inaudible. I know, Mom. It wasn't like that. I just needed someone here. The conversation shifted then to practical matters. Arrangements for Michael's belongings, calls to relatives, when the extended family might visit. I stayed in the kitchen, pouring mugs of coffee and setting them on the table, feeling like an intruder in a moment that wasn't mine. When they joined me for breakfast, the air was thick with unspoken words. Margaret dominated the conversation, asking Olivia about funeral thank you notes, sorting through paperwork, and whether she'd considered joining a widow's support group at the local church. She barely acknowledged me, save for a polite, "Thank you for the coffee," when I passed her a mug. Olivia picked at her bagel, her eyes darting to me occasionally with a mix of gratitude and embarrassment. I ate in silence, the cream cheese tasting like cardboard, my mind racing. What had seemed like a simple act of kindness last night now felt complicated, layered with implications I hadn't considered. After the meal, I cleared my plate and stood. I should get going, I said, addressing Olivia directly. Let me know if you need anything else. Margaret nodded approvingly, but Olivia walked me to the door, her steps hesitant. In the foyer, away from her mother-in-law's earshot, she whispered, "Thank you again, Daniel, for everything." Her eyes held mine, a flicker of warmth amid the confusion. I squeezed her shoulder lightly. "Anytime." But as I stepped out into the crisp morning air, the door clicking shut behind me, a knot formed in my stomach. The neighborhood looked the same, lawns manicured, cars gleaming in driveways, but something had shifted. Olivia's avoidance started subtly after that. My texts checking in, "How are you today?" or "Need help with that window again?" got brief replies. "I'm okay, thanks," or "Not right now." A few days later, I saw her in the yard watering plants and waved. She smiled politely but turned away quickly, disappearing inside. I understood, or at least I tried to. The pressure from Margaret, the fear of gossip in our tight-knit community, it all made sense. People here were kind but watchful, A single man staying over at a new widow's house could spark whispers at the next block party. I felt a surge of frustration, not at her, but at the invisible rules that boxed her in during her grief. Still, beneath it, my concern for her deepened. She deserved space, but I couldn't shake the image of her alone in that house, the lights dimming early each night. The days that followed blurred into a quiet unease I hadn't anticipated. Walking back to my house that morning, the crisp air biting at my skin, I replayed the breakfast scene in my mind. The way Margaret's eyes had flicked over me, the subtle tension in her voice, Olivia's hurried explanations. I told myself it was nothing. Grief brought out protectiveness in people. But deep down, I knew it had planted a seed of doubt, not just for her, but for me too. What had felt like a natural act of compassion now carried the weight of scrutiny, and I wondered if I'd overstepped without realizing it. At first, I gave her space. That afternoon, I sent a simple text. "Hey, just checking in. Let me know if you need anything, groceries, yard work, whatever." Her reply came hours later. "Thanks, Daniel. I'm managing." Short, polite, but distant. I didn't push. The next day, I spotted her through my window, watering the flower beds in her front yard. She looked smaller somehow, her movements mechanical, like she was going through the motions to fill the void. I waved from my porch and she returned it with a tight smile before turning away, disappearing inside without a word. The curtain stayed drawn after that, the house taking on a shuttered, almost abandoned feel, even though I knew she was there. A week passed like that, me glancing over at her place during my morning runs or evening walks, her lights flickering on early but dimming before 10. I tried again with a message. "The window frame we fixed last spring, want me to check if it's holding up?" This time, the response was even briefer. "Not now, but thanks." I stared at my phone, a knot tightening in my chest. Was it Margaret's words echoing in her head? The fear of what the neighbors might whisper at the next community barbecue? Or was it her own guilt bubbling up in the wake of Michael's death? I understood the need for boundaries. In a place like this, where everyone knew everyone's business, a widow entertaining a single man overnight could spark rumors faster than a summer wildfire. But understanding didn't make it sting any less. One evening, as the sun dipped below the Rockies, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I found a small paper bag on my doorstep. Inside was a loaf of banana bread, still warm, wrapped in foil. Tucked beside it was a note in her neat handwriting. "Thank you for being there that night. I just need some time." I held the bread, inhaling the sweet, familiar scent, and felt a mix of relief and ache. At least she was baking again. That was a good sign, right? But the words "sometime" lingered like an unspoken barrier. I ate a slice alone at my kitchen table, the house feeling quieter than usual, and wondered if I should let go. Maybe I was reading too much into our connection. We were neighbors after all, not confidants, not anything more. Yet the memory of her vulnerability that night, the way her hand had trembled when she handed me the pillow, kept pulling me back. I couldn't shake the sense that she was retreating not just from me, but from the world, building walls to protect a heart that had already shattered. Still, I didn't give up. Not entirely. The next morning, I ground a fresh batch of coffee beans, Colombian roast, her favorite from our past chats, and left a small bag on her porch with a note. "For those mornings that need a little extra warmth." No response came, but the bag was gone when I checked later. A few days after, I picked wildflowers from the nearby parks, daisies and lupines, simple and unassuming, and tied them with twine, placing them by her door. Again, silence. I told myself it was enough to know she might see them, might feel a flicker of care in the midst of her isolation. But nights were harder. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling fan's lazy spin, I'd replay our conversations, questioning if my presence had helped or just complicated things. The fear of misunderstanding gnawed at me. What if she thought I had ulterior motives? What if I did, buried somewhere deep? No, I pushed that aside. This wasn't about me. It was about her deserving someone who wouldn't walk away at the first sign of complication. Patience, I reminded myself. She was worth the wait, even if it meant enduring this radio silence that stretched on like the endless Colorado plains. 2 weeks in, the avoidance felt more deliberate. I saw her car leave for errands, grocery runs, perhaps a visit to Margaret's, but she never lingered outside. Her yard, once meticulously tended, started showing weeds creeping in. I mowed my lawn one Saturday and considered doing hers too, but held back, not wanting to overstep further. Instead, I focused on my work, burying myself in designs for a new client's mountain cabin remodel. Yet, every evening my eyes drifted to her window hoping for a sign. A light left on longer, a curtain pulled back. The knot in my stomach grew, a mix of worry and self-doubt. Was I being too persistent? Too naive? In the quiet hours, I realized my feelings had deepened beyond neighborly concern. It wasn't pity, it was admiration for her strength, a quiet pull toward the vulnerability she'd shared. But I kept my distance, respecting the space she'd claimed, even as it left me wrestling with the uncertainty of what came next. One crisp autumn afternoon, the leaves on the maples turning gold and red, I was in my garage sorting through some design samples when I heard the soft knock at my front door. I wiped my hands on a rag and opened it to find Olivia standing there, holding a warm loaf of pumpkin bread wrapped in a cloth. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but there was a genuine smile on her face, the first real one I'd seen since the funeral. It lit up her features, softening the shadows that had lingered for weeks. "Daniel," she said quietly, her voice steady but emotional. I baked this, and I was wondering if you could come over and help fix that coat rack in the hallway. It's been loose for months, and I finally feel like dealing with it." I didn't hesitate. "Of course," I said, setting the rag aside and following her across the shared lawn. The air smelled of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the walk between our houses didn't carry the weight of unspoken tension. Inside her kitchen, the familiar scent of spices and fresh bread enveloped me. Olivia set the loaf on the counter and turned to face me, her hands twisting together nervously. "I owe you an apology," she began, her voice low, "for pulling away like that, for not answering your messages properly, for acting like nothing happened that night. I was scared. Scared of what Mom thought. Scared of what the neighbors might say. Scared of what it all meant for me. Michael's gone, and I didn't know how to let anyone in without feeling like I was betraying his memory. But every time I saw your light on next door, or found those little things you left, coffee, flowers, I felt it. I missed having someone here. I missed you." Her words hung in the air, raw and honest. I stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. "You don't have to apologize, Olivia. I understood. Grief isn't linear, and neither is healing. I just wanted you to know I wasn't going anywhere unless you told me to." She looked up at me, eyes glistening. "I'm telling you now. Don't go anywhere." Then, almost tentatively, she reached out and took my hand. Her fingers were cool at first, but they warmed against mine. We stood like that for a moment, the kitchen quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. We moved to the hallway to fix the coat rack. It was a simple job, a loose screw, a bit of tightening, but we took our time, laughing softly when the drill slipped or a screw rolled under the table. Afterward, she made tea, chamomile with a hint of honey, and we sat at the kitchen table, the pumpkin bread sliced between us. We talked about the early days, how I'd first moved in with boxes everywhere, how she'd brought over cookies as a welcome gesture. She told me about her dreams for the garden she'd never quite finished, and I shared sketches of a cabin project I was working on. The conversation flowed easily, like it had before, but with a new undercurrent, something tender and unspoken. From there, things shifted gradually, day by day. No grand declarations, no rush. We'd bake together in the evenings, her teaching me how to knead dough properly, me teasing her about her secret ingredient that was just extra vanilla. On weekends, we'd walk the neighborhood trails, leaves crunching underfoot, talking about nothing and everything. She started leaving her porch light on later, and I'd knock with a bottle of wine or a new recipe I'd found. The coat rack stayed fixed, but so did the small things that had been broken. A squeaky door hinge, a leaky faucet, the quiet corners of her house that had felt too empty. The neighborhood noticed, slowly. At first, there were sidelong glances when we walked together, but over time they faded. People waved more warmly, asked how she was doing with genuine concern. Margaret visited less frequently, her calls shorter, and when she did come, she greeted me with a nod instead of suspicion. The whispers died down, Grief had its own timeline, and so did healing. One evening in early December, as the first snow dusted the ground, I came over to help her decorate. Olivia had pulled out the Christmas tree from the garage, the same one she'd shared with Michael, and we set it up in the living room. She strung the lights herself, her movements deliberate, almost reverent. When we plugged them in, the room filled with a warm glow, reflecting off the ornaments she'd hung carefully. She stepped back, arms wrapped around herself, and looked at me. "I didn't think I'd be able to do this again," she said softly. "But the house feels warm now. Not just the lights, it's alive. Because of you." I crossed the room and stood beside her, our shoulders touching. "It's because of you, Olivia, you let me in." She turned to me then, her eyes meeting mine with a clarity that took my breath away. I reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and she leaned into the touch. We didn't kiss, not yet, but the moment felt like a promise. We stood there, watching the tree sparkle, the snow falling silently outside, and I knew this was the beginning of something real. Not a replacement for what she'd lost, but a new light in the same house. In the months that followed, we built a quiet life together, slow, steady, and full of small joys. The house that had once felt so empty now echoed with laughter, the scent of baking, and the warmth of two people who had found each other when they needed it most. And as winter deepened, I realized that peace isn't about forgetting the past. It's about carrying it gently together into whatever comes next.